All right, welcome back to my little humble studio setup here. Okay, so let's talk about what you're going to do on this next assignment. So here I have generated a nice little chart. It happens to be in watercolor, and I did that just in the interest of time because we're on a bit of a time crunch here for me to get these videos posted. But what I did is I ended up making a little maquette or a little study here of what you're going to do. So you're going to take one of your 18 by 24, 16 by 20 inch canvases that you received in your kit. You're going to divide it in half. Half of it's going to become a shadow sphere. The other half is going to become a value chart. And then below that value chart, you're going to have a color chart. That color wheel is going to have your primaries and secondaries. As much as possible, I would like you to at least initially try to use those primary colors and mix your secondary colors. And that is followed up by a lecture when we get into our first complementary painting. But in other words, first start with these three colors right here, your red, blue, and yellow. Those are your primaries. Then you're going to mix from your primaries into your secondary colors, and that's what we're after on the color chart. So I'll have a picture of this posted on Canvas as a little bit of a reference too, so feel free to refer to it. Today, my panel I'm using is slightly smaller than what your canvas size is, and I want to paint a little bit larger just so I can make sure everybody can tell what's going on. So I'm going to remove this. Look for that on Canvas, and just remember you're going to be dividing your canvas in half, and then you are going to be proceeding forward a little bit differently than I am. I'm painting the whole surface of this just so I can make sure that you can see what's going on the camera. Okay, so I've got it all squared up and I think we're good to go. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how to start. So by now, hopefully you've watched that setup video. The one thing I didn't mention is sometimes you have a garbage can or a plastic bag close by to fill up towels that get dirty as you go. So that was one thing I failed to mention earlier, but don't be afraid to utilize a garbage can or a plastic bag also. You might find that to be really handy when you start to throw away some of those dirty paper towels. Okay, so I have posted a video. This other professor who's fantastic, I watched it just a few minutes ago. He takes you through the whole process of painting a shadow sphere from beginning to end, and he speeds up the film. So it's only like 15 minutes long or something. But the nice thing is you get the whole process of how to paint that. So keep that in mind, but I'm going to show you enough to get started. And keep in mind also you've watched that video on the shadow sphere, so you know the basic components, including the highlight, core shadow, cast shadow, reflective light, so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by getting rid of this white. So on my palette, I have taken a little bit of black and a little bit of white and a little bit of water and mixed them together. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to proceed to go here on my painting surface, and I just want to get rid of the white. Now, if you're struggling with this, it probably means that you're not using quite enough water. Okay, so I'm using quite a bit of water and not necessarily a lot of pigment. Some pigment. If you're used to watercoloring, you're going to be using more paint than you're used to using for some kind of process like that. But what I want to do at this stage is I just want to get rid of the white of my canvas. In this case, I'm painting on a piece of masonite that's been gessoed. But same sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some tone and I'm just going to spread it. Now, if you find it easier to use a paper towel or something like that, that's fine. Okay, so that's step number one. You just want to start by massing this in a nice value. Get rid of that white so you're not staring at that white throughout your whole painting process. And you'll thank me later, so you won't have all these little white specks showing up on your painting. Now, if you're still waiting on materials and you're a little afraid of this step, and you know your canvas isn't going to come for a long time, tell you what, you can paint on a piece of paper. You can paint the shadow sphere on a piece of cardboard if you're in a bind, something like that. I understand, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to draw with our brush. There's really no need to worry about using a pencil, in my opinion, okay? And here's why, because we're going to lose our painting and find it again. We're going to be going back and forth. I'm going to take a quick look at the camera here in a second and make sure that I am set up to where you can see. Oh, you know what? I need to back off on the camera a little bit here, make sure you can see a little bit better. That looks a little bit better for us, folks. Okay, so now I've got this mapped out. I've come in and I've identified a couple of the bigger shapes. Here's my shadow sphere. Here's my cast shadow. Refer to the canvas page. I'm going to have some sample shadow spheres on there for you to refer to. Or if you have something that'll work in your house, try using that. If you have a white beach ball, chances are you probably don't, or a volleyball. A golf ball might be a little on the small side, but you could set up your own shadow sphere and use that as a reference if you want to, and kind of refer to the materials that I have on canvas for you. When you do this, though, I am looking for you to do three things. I want you to develop, number one, a background. I'm going to put B here for background. I want you to develop a middle ground, this being our shadow sphere, and then also a foreground. Okay, I'm going to put the B here because apparently I was a little off camera. Okay, so there you go. Background, foreground, middle ground, these three big sections, right? Then the next thing you need to do is identify where your light source is coming from. So my light source is coming from right here. Okay, I'm going to draw a little sun. Doo, 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 doo. Happy sun. Okay, so there's my light source coming in from this direction right here. Okay, and square that up a little bit better, even better yet. Okay, and so now I have my light source. That means that my cast shadow, coarse shadow, are going to be located on the opposite side right over here. Symmetry-wise, I could probably round this out just a little bit more on top. It's looking better. It's not that big of a deal if your drawing's off a little bit at this stage, because we're gonna paint over it and manipulate it and smooth out some edges and stuff. But if you have something kind of close, it's going to get you going. Please don't do something like this. All right, imagine that this is my canvas right here. Okay, and I come in here and I paint this little tiny dot right in the center, like boink. Okay, avoid that. Don't make it some smoochy woochy little tiny circle in the middle of your canvas, but rather fill that whole canvas and use big shapes. Don't forget about your background. In fact, it's so important, I'm going to start there because students don't, and they always kind of forget about the background. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my background first. I've just made the decision, it's going to be a lot easier if I mass it in kind of a dark value, okay, just to get started. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go back and paint all the way in. I am limited to about 15-minute video tutorials, which is good because I think you'll get bored if I go for much beyond that anyhow, okay? So I'm going to mass in that background right there, okay, just like so. And start with that big shape. And can you see how this shadow sphere is already starting to come forward? Okay, now I'm going to come in, I'm going to take a little bit of white, a little bit of black, and what I'm doing on my mixtures down here is I'm just taking the paint from the front edge. In fact, maybe I'll show you down here on my palette how I'm mixing real quickly. So sorry, it's not the world's greatest setup, but I think that'll work for you. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm coming into where I'm on the front end of my blob of paint, and I'm just using water, and I'm trying to preserve this area right here, which has the bigger body of paint, right? And I'm just pulling from the front of it, and I'm using a bit of water, and that's why you kind of need a mixing surface. Okay, so now I've mixed to something that's a little bit more like a neutral gray, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to assign that to my shadow sphere shape. Okay, now that I have my shadow sphere up and running, and don't be afraid to use some of your larger brushes. A lot of times beginners use brushes that are way too small. Okay, I wouldn't go any smaller than the size 6 that I have, and honestly if I had an 8 or 10, it might even work better. The other thing I'll mention is I'm going pretty thin. Can you hear that noise? I'm going to stop talking for a second and listen to that. You hear that scratchy noise? That scratchy noise coming off of your painting, that's exactly what you want. You want to hear that scratchy noise coming up off your painting. Try to preserve that texture of the canvas for as long as you can, and try not to paint too thick at first. Later on you can go thicker, and that's totally fine. Okay, so I'm just massing in my big values. I'm going to come in here, mass in this shape that is my cast shadow. I'm going to come in and start to evaluate. Good pun. I'm going to put in assign a value here for my core shadow. Kind of link that to the cast shadow. And then I might come in with something a little bit lighter to speak of the foreground. So this could be the surface that's sitting on, like, say, a table or something. The reason I want you to include the foreground and the background is I think it helps you to understand a lot better what's happening in terms of space, right? So if you're just doing a shadow sphere, you're still learning things. No question about it. But the downside is that when you're done, it just might be floating in space, okay? So I've really roughed this in. These are just some really thin layers of paint. I'm starting to overlap. One thing you'll learn, it's a lot easier just to overlap than it is to paint right up to the edge of something. So did you see what I did right there on that shadow? I just came in and just cleaned up that edge by going over it like a 1/16 of an inch, and bam, I have a nice clean transition between the two shapes. Painting is different than drawing in that what you're doing is you're really looking for shapes, and you're just laying down a series of shapes. That's why it's so much faster in a lot of cases, because you can just lay down these really big shapes and you can start to mass in objects really, really quickly. Okay, so that's where I'm at. Let's check the time on our recording here. I'm at about 12 minutes. Woo-wee! All right, so I gotta speed this up. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna speak of our light source over here, which would mean that we have highlight coming off right here. One little warning I would mention, don't make your highlight too large in most cases. It depends how your object is lit. But by and large, students tend to paint that shadow pretty well, but when they come into the highlight, they just paint it too large. Unless your light source is really diffused, you're going to have just kind of a small little highlight like that. Okay, my goal is to have almost no line over on this side of the sphere and just have a shape meet a shape. Now, the difference is on this other side, I want to have a really hard edge. Hard edge is what painters will refer to as a line. Okay, so I'm going to take a thinner brush here at this point, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to sculpt in a little bit darker line on this side of the sphere. What this will do is it will really help convince the viewer that this side is in shadow. Okay, this side is a lot harder edged than this other side. This side I want to keep very smooth. In fact, so smooth I could even come in here with kind of a clean brush, right? And dry it off a little bit, and I might just smooth this edge down right here. Okay, so I want this edge to be very smooth, very blended. I have a very blended edge on this side, and at the same time I want to have a very hard edge on this side right here of my shadow sphere. As you're starting to develop this, you're going to need to go back and forth, but I would review the next video that's going up on under this link of a more finished painting. I just don't have the benefit of time today to take this further. So refer to that, but what you're going to do is you're going to start smoothing out these edges. I might speak of a little bit of the reflective light that resides right here. Okay, and start to blend that in. Some of it is pressure. One thing I haven't talked too much about is don't grip your brushes like this, okay? You're not writing your name in cursive. When you're painting, your hand is all the way back here on the back end of your brush, and you're holding your brush back here. and you have a mechanical advantage that way because your acrylic is kind of like the consistency of peanut butter. And I've got to sign off. All right, friends, have fun.